Mama, why must you do this here?
Jesus, what have you done?
Everyone heard the slap, but not everyone understood the cost.
That night, he thought it was just embarrassment. He didn't know. He had just lost everything.
A perfect wedding, a perfect son, a perfect image. No one saw the crack forming. She didn't come to embarrass him. She came with something else. Something he wasn't ready to face. That slap, it wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear of something being revealed. The wedding hall looked like a promise someone could live inside. Crystal chandeliers hung low over a sea of warm gold light, turning every glass into a small sun. White roses spilled from tall vases like slow waterfalls. Musicians in matching black suits played soft highlife and strings, just loud enough to feel expensive, just quiet enough to keep the conversations private. At the front, under an arch of ivory fabric and fresh greenery, the groom stood with a jaw set too tight for a day that was supposed to be joyful. Tunde Adeyemi, 25, Nigerian. Tall and broad-shouldered in a black tuxedo so sharp it looked like it could cut the air. His bow tie sat perfectly. His watch caught the chandelier light each time he moved his hand. He had practiced the smile he wore, now polished, contained, like a man who had learned early that success had to be defended. Beside him stood his bride, a doura radiant in a white gown beaded with stones that shimmered when she breathed. Her gel was sculpted like a crown. Her eyes were lined with careful precision, but there was softness in them when she looked at him, a softness that didn't know what it was about to witness. Behind them, the room buzzed. Laughter, phones lifted. Aunties in lace and the sweebi, uncles adjusting cuffs, friends clinking glasses. Every face carried that celebratory Nigerian confidence. This is our family, this is our joy, this is our moment. And yet, under the sweetness, there was another sound, one no one admitted to hearing, waiting, because everyone knew the rumor the way people know smoke before they see fire. Tunde's mother was coming. The doors at the back of the hall opened with a whisper of hinges and a soft push of air. A sliver of daylight spilled in, and for a half second, the whole room turned its head the way a flock turns toward movement. She stepped in alone. Her name was Mama Ifeoma. She was not dressed in the sleek, modern lace the other women wore. She wore traditional attire, deep blue wrapper with subtle patterns, a blouse that had been stitched by hands that knew her body better than any designer. Her gel was tied neatly, but not extravagantly. Around her neck was a simple pearl necklace, the kind that had survived years of careful saving and careful wearing. In her hand, she carried a small envelope, slightly worn at the edges like it had been held and unheld 100 times. She looked around as if checking whether she belonged. For a moment, the music kept playing. Conversations lowered. Then, like a curtain falling, the hall quieted in a way that felt deliberate. People smiled too quickly. Some looked away. Others watched openly, hungry for the shape of trouble. Mama Ifeoma's eyes found her son. Tunde saw her, and his smile, his practiced, handsome smile, stiffened. His shoulders rose a fraction, like a man preparing for impact. Then the look on his face changed, not to joy, not even to surprise, to calculation. Adara leaned slightly toward him, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "Is that?" He didn't answer. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on his mother, like she was a stain someone had tracked onto a white floor. Mama Ifeoma began walking down the aisle formed by tables and chairs. Each step was careful. Not timid careful, like someone carrying something fragile inside her chest. As she passed groups of guests, she offered small nods, polite smiles. Some women responded with thin grins that didn't reach their eyes. A few men pretended to check their phones. One auntie whispered behind a hand, and a ripple of suppressed laughter followed like a shadow. Mama Ifeoma kept walking. Her gaze didn't leave her son. When she reached the front, she stopped just a few feet away, close enough for him to smell the familiar scent of shea butter and mild soap. Close enough for him to see the lines time had carved around her eyes, the quiet exhaustion in her face that no makeup could hide. "Tund," she said softly. The single word landed in the silence like a coin dropped into water. He didn't say, "Mama." He didn't say, "Welcome." He said, through clenched teeth, in a voice that tried to sound calm but cracked at the edges, "What are you doing here?" A murmur moved through the room. The musicians lowered their volume, instinct sharpened by years of playing at celebrations that sometimes turned into wars. Mama Ifeoma blinked. She held up the envelope with both hands like an offering. "I came to bless you," she said. "It is your wedding." Tun's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to her face. His embarrassment was a living thing now flushed into his cheeks, vibrating in his jaw. Adawara looked between them, confusion tightening her lips. "Tund," she whispered. He ignored her again. "Mama," he said, and the way he said it made the words sound like a complaint. "Why are you dressed like that?" The question sliced through the room. Mama Ifeoma's throat moved as she swallowed. "Like what? Like—" He gestured at her, not even trying to hide the disgust. "Like you just came from the village. Look at everyone here. Do you know what you're doing to me?" A few guests inhaled sharply. Some eyes widened, not in sympathy, but in anticipation. Nigerian gatherings could be cruel that way pain became entertainment the moment it appeared in public. Mama Ifeoma's face held steady, but her hands tightened around the envelope. "I wore what I have," she said quietly. "I thought it was enough." Tund laughed once short, humorless. "Enough? Mama, today is not your market day. Today is my wedding. My wife's family is here. People who matter are here." Adawara's eyes flashed. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like a woman realizing her house had a crack in the foundation. Too late, too public. Mama Ifeoma turned her gaze to Adawara, as if searching for a bridge. "My daughter," she began softly. "Congratulations. May your home be—" Tund stepped in front of her words the way someone steps on a shadow. "Don't." The room froze. Mama Ifeoma looked at him fully now, and in her eyes there was something deeper than hurt. There was disbelief. Like she was still trying to recognize the face of the boy she had carried on her back through rainstorms, the one she had fed with food she sometimes didn't eat herself. She lowered her voice even more. "Tund," she said, "I am not here to shame you. I am here to honor you." Tund's chest rose and fell. He leaned closer, anger sharpening his features. "Honor me?" he hissed. "You honor me by staying away, by not bringing this here." He pointed at her clothes again, at her head tie, at the very evidence of where he came from. Then he glanced at the envelope. "What is that?" Mama Ifeoma lifted it carefully. "A little gift," she said. "It is not much, but I wanted." Tund snatched the envelope out of her hands. The movement was fast enough to make Adawara flinch. Mama Ifeoma's fingers remained open in the air for a second, as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. Tund tore the envelope open without looking at her face. A few notes slid out neatly folded naira, the kind that looked like it had been ironed. The amount wasn't large, but it was heavy with meaning, heavy with sacrifice. He stared at it. His mouth twisted in something like disgust, something like humiliation. "This is what you came with?" he said loudly, so loudly that no one could pretend not to hear. "This small thing? This is what you want to use to embarrass me?" Mama Ifeoma's eyes widened, her voice barely carried. "Tund, it is what I could." "What you could," he repeated, louder, harsher. "Do you know how much this wedding cost? Do you know what kind of family I'm marrying into? He waved the notes as if they were dirty. A few guests chuckled small, nervous laughs that tried to disguise their discomfort. Some women's eyes darted away, but not fast enough. Some men smirked behind their glasses, enjoying the power of watching a mother reduced. Adara stepped forward, finally finding her voice. "Tund, please." He turned on her without warning. "Stay out of it," he snapped. Adara went still, stunned. Tears pooled instantly in her eyes, but she fought them back with the pride of a woman who refused to cry in a room full of strangers. Mama Efiama's lips parted. She looked at Adara, then back at her son. In that silence, in that suspended moment, you could almost see the years behind Mama Efiama's eyes, the nights she had slept on the edge of worry, the mornings she had carried water before sunrise, the days she had sold and sold and sold so her son could wear shoes that didn't have holes. And now, on the day he wore a tuxedo, he looked at her like she was the whole. "Tund," she whispered. "I am your mother." The words should have softened him. Instead, they seemed to ignite him. He glanced around the hall, at the faces watching, at the phones that had stopped recording the wedding and had started recording the shame. His pride screamed for distance from her. His pride demanded a performance, so he gave it one. He stepped closer, close enough that only she could hear his breath. "If you loved me," he said, low and venomous, "you would not stand here like this." Mama Efiama's eyes filled with tears. They didn't fall yet. She was holding them with the strength of someone who had held herself together for decades. "I loved you when nobody else did," she whispered back, and her voice trembled on the last word. That should have ended it. That should have been the moment he stopped. But the room was watching. And sometimes a man's ego is louder than his conscience. Tund's face tightened. His hand lifted, not as if he planned it, but as if his body had already decided he would never be small again, never be reminded of where he came from. Mama Efiama barely had time to blink. The slap cracked through the hall like a gunshot. It was sharp and sudden. The sound bounced off chandeliers, off marble, off the silent mouths of guests. Mama Efiama's head turned with the force of it. Her gel shifted slightly. The pearls at her neck trembled. For a heartbeat, her body swayed, not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough to show she was human. Adara gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Someone near the back whispered, "Jesus," but no one moved. No auntie rushed forward. No uncle grabbed Tund's arm. No friend pulled him back. They only watched, frozen in the way people freeze when they know they are seeing something they will talk about later. Mama Efiama's hand slowly rose to her cheek. A red mark bloomed across her skin like a cruel flower opening. Tears finally spilled, hot and silent, tracing paths down her face. She looked at her son, not with anger, with something worse. With sorrow so deep it looked like love had finally reached its breaking point. "Tund," she said, and the name came out like a prayer that had been answered with silence. "Why?" Her voice was barely audible, but in the quiet, it was enough to make the room feel smaller. Tund's breathing was heavy. His eyes darted, not to his mother, but to the guests, checking their reactions like a man checking a mirror. Adara was shaking, her eyes shining, her expression caught between horror and heartbreak. Mama Efiama swallowed, steadying herself. She lowered her hand from her cheek. Her fingers trembled, but her posture straightened. She didn't scream. She didn't curse him. She didn't beg. Instead, she looked around at the faces staring, the mouths half open, the phones still. And she understood something in a single glance. This wasn't only her son's cruelty. It was the room's permission. She turned away from Tund without another word. Slowly, she walked toward the wedding table where gifts and cards were placed. Her steps were measured, dignified, as if she refused to give the room the satisfaction of seeing her run. She placed the remaining envelope, now empty, now stripped of its humble offering, on the edge of the table anyway, smoothing it with her fingers like it mattered. Because to her, it did. A few guests shifted, uncomfortable, but still no one spoke. The music had stopped completely now. Even the air conditioner sounded loud. Mama Efiama wiped her tears with the back of her hand. The red mark on her cheek glistened under the chandeliers. Then she turned toward the exit. She walked past the bride and groom, past Adaura's trembling hands, past Tun's rigid posture. Tun didn't stop her. He didn't call her back. He didn't say, "Mama, wait." He stood like a man who had won something, even though what he had just destroyed was priceless. Mama Efiama reached the doors. The daylight beyond them looked too bright for what had happened inside. She paused for half a second, her shoulders rising with one silent breath. Then she stepped out, and the doors closed behind her. The hall remained full of people, full of wealth, full of lights, full of flowers. But the silence she left behind was heavier than all of it. Adaura felt it before anyone said a word, the silence. It followed her from the reception hall into the bridal suite like a second shadow. The makeup artist kept smiling. The bridesmaids kept adjusting her veil. Someone laughed too loudly at something that wasn't even funny. But the silence stayed. It had moved into her chest now, pressing against her ribs. She sat in front of the mirror, the white lace of her gown glowing under the soft lights, and forced herself to focus on her reflection. The bride staring back at her looked beautiful, composed, elegant, but behind her eyes, something had cracked. She could still hear it. The slap. It wasn't the loudest sound in the room. The glass that shattered afterward was louder. The murmurs were louder. But the slap had weight. It didn't land on a cheek. It landed on the entire room. And now it was landing on her marriage. Tun's just stressed, one of her bridesmaids whispered, gently adjusting her gel. "You know how men get on wedding days." Adaura forced a soft smile. "Yes," she said, but she didn't know. She had known Tund as ambitious, driven, protective of his image, sensitive about status. She had not known him as the kind of man who would raise his hand to his mother in front of hundreds of people. She remembered Mama Efiama's eyes, not the tears, the disbelief. The question, why? That word echoed louder than the slap. Across the hall, Tund stood near the bar with two of his closest friends, Chike and Femi. Their laughter sounded sharp, brittle. "Man, that was wild," Chike said, shaking his head. Half shock, half admiration. "But sometimes you've got to set boundaries," Femi nodded. "You can't let that old-school mentality ruin your big day." Tund took a slow sip of champagne. His jaw stayed tight. "She knew what she was doing," he muttered. "She always does this. Shows up at the worst possible time." He said it like he was trying to convince himself. Neither of his friends mentioned the look on his mother's face. Neither of them mentioned how the air had shifted after she left. Because in moments like that, loyalty often chooses pride over truth. At the head table, Adaura's father had seen everything. Chief Okafor had built his name carefully. His suits were tailored in London. His shoes polished until they reflected the floor. He paid for half the wedding, not because he had to, but because his daughter deserved it. He had also just watched a young man slap his mother, and he hadn't moved. He stood beside his wife, his face carved from stone. Guests approached cautiously, offering congratulations with tight smiles. "What happened back there?" One uncle whispered. Chief Okafor gave a controlled smile. "Family matter," he said, but inside, something unsettled him. He had been raised to believe that a man who dishonors his mother in public does not fear consequences in private. He looked across the room at his daughter. She was smiling for photos, her posture flawless. Her eyes were not. Later that evening, when the music resumed and the dancing began, something invisible had shifted. The guests still danced. Money still floated in the air. The DJ still shouted celebratory chants. But people were dancing around the memory, not with it. Women leaned toward each other, whispers slipping between them like water through cracks. "Did you see it? I told you that boy had pride. She came alone. That woman came alone. Maybe she did something. What could she possibly have done to deserve that?" Phones buzzed discreetly inside purses and suit pockets. Messages moved faster than the music, a clip, a rumor, a version of the story. By the time the cake was cut, the story had already grown teeth. Adawra danced when she was supposed to. She laughed when cameras turned toward her. She leaned into Tund when he pulled her close. But she could feel the tension in him through the fabric of his tuxedo. He danced harder than usual, louder, smiling wider, like a man trying to drown something. After the reception ended and the guests filtered out into the warm Lagos night, Adawra found herself alone for a moment on the balcony of the hotel suite. The city lights shimmered below like scattered stars. She wrapped her arms around herself and finally let her face fall. She took out her phone. No missed calls from Mama Efioma, no messages, nothing. She hesitated. Should she call? Her thumb hovered over the screen. Before she could decide, the balcony door slid open behind her. Tund stepped out, loosening his bow tie. "There you are," he said. Adawra turned. "Your mother," she began carefully. "We should check on her." His expression hardened instantly. "Ada, not tonight. She left crying. She always cries." The words landed flat. Adawra studied him. "She's your mother." He looked out over the city. "And I'm not a child anymore." Silence stretched between them. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. "I did what I had to do," he said finally. It wasn't regret. It was justification. The next morning, Mama Ifeoma's house remained quiet. She didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't post. She sat at the edge of her bed, the house filled with ordinary morning sounds, distant traffic, a rooster somewhere nearby, the low hum of electricity. Her cheek was still faintly swollen. She touched it once, not because it hurt, but because it reminded her. Her phone rested on the bedside table. She didn't pick it up. She would not beg. Back at the hotel, Tund's phone buzzed nonstop. Friends congratulated him. Some joked about handling your business. Others sent laughing emojis with exaggerated retellings of the moment. He ignored the messages that hinted at criticism. He ignored the single message from a distant aunt that read, "A man who forgets the hand that fed him will one day search for food alone." He deleted it. Adawra noticed. She said nothing. By afternoon, the story had traveled beyond the wedding hall. Clips existed. Short, shaky, incomplete. Angles that caught the motion but not the words. But something was missing. The beginning, the context. The exchange no one had fully heard, and that gap created space for speculation. That evening, as Tund sat in the hotel room, scrolling through his phone, calculating the damage to his image, his screen lit up with an unfamiliar email notification. Subject, wedding footage, private copy. He frowned. It was from the videographer, a young Nigerian filmmaker named Emeka, known for his cinematic style and quiet presence. The message was brief. "Good evening, sir. I thought it would be best to send you the full raw footage from yesterday before I begin editing. Please review and advise." Attached was a file. Large, uncut, complete. The entire wedding, including the part no one had truly seen. Tund stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he tapped it, and the video began to play. The clip showed his face clearly. Not a blurry side angle, not a shaky guess, not a rumor stitched together by people hungry for drama. It was Tund Ademi, 25, black Nigerian, in a black tuxedo, standing beneath crystal chandeliers with the kind of confidence that usually made people step aside. And then, in the clean, unforgiving clarity of Emeka's raw footage, that confidence twisted into something uglier. The camera had been positioned slightly left of the aisle, steady on a gimbal, trained on the couple for what was meant to be a cinematic moment. The audio was sharp. Every breath, every soft gasp, every swallowed laugh, preserved like a witness refusing to forget. Tund pressed play. For the first few seconds, it looked like the wedding he had paid for. Beautiful, polished, expensive. Adawra glowed beside him. Guests smiled. Someone sprayed Naira in the distance. The DJ's voice floated like sugar over the crowd. Then Mama Ifeoma entered the frame. Tun's throat tightened. He leaned forward without realizing it, elbows on his knees, as if leaning closer could rewrite what was already recorded. Mama Ifeoma walked slowly, holding the envelope like it was sacred. There was a tremor in her fingers the guest clips had never captured. There was something else, too. Hope. Hope that her son would look at her the way he used to. Tund watched his own face change the moment he saw her. In real life, he had felt it as irritation. On video, it looked like contempt. It startled him, not because he didn't know what he'd done, but because he hadn't realized how cold he'd looked doing it. The microphone near the camera picked up his voice before he even reached her. Not loud, not yelling, just sharp enough to cut. "Mama, why must you do this here?" The words landed like a slap before the slap. Mama Ifeoma's lips parted slightly. "I came to bless you," she said, voice soft and fragile. "It is your wedding." And then Tund said the sentence, the one that would ruin him. It didn't come after the slap. It came before. It slipped out like a confession he didn't know he was making. He glanced around the room, at the tables, at the bride, at the watching faces, then looked back at his mother as if her presence was proof that he could never fully outrun the life he had clawed his way out of. His jaw tightened. And he said, clearly, unmistakably, "You embarrassed me my whole life." The air in the hotel room seemed to thin. Tund froze with the remote in his hand. He rewound it, pressed play again. "You embarrassed me my whole life." There it was. Not misheard, not misunderstood, not a joke that landed wrong. A simple, brutal sentence aimed at the woman who raised him. He watched Mama Ifeoma's face as the words hit. The camera caught it, the widening of her eyes, the way her breath caught like something had struck deep inside, somewhere no one could shield. In that second, she looked older than she had walking in. Not wrinkled, wounded. On the video, her voice trembled. "Tund, I did my best." Then came the part he had remembered differently. He leaned closer, not to comfort, but to deliver cruelty with the intimacy of someone who knows exactly where the softest places are. "If you wanted to be my mother," he said quietly, "you would have learned how to look like one." The microphone caught it. The camera held it. Behind them, the elegant guests in the suibi did what crowds often do when they sense shame. They leaned in. They listened. They waited for blood. Adaura's voice drifted in from the side, faint and pleading. "Tund, please." He didn't turn. His eyes stayed locked on Mama Ifeoma, like this was his stage, his moment to avenge every memory he couldn't afford to carry anymore. Mama Ifeoma lifted the envelope with both hands. "I brought a gift," she said. "It is small, but it is from my—" He snatched it. In the present, Tund's grip tightened around the remote as his past self tore the envelope open impatiently. The naira slid out. Neatly folded, crisp, the kind of money saved slowly, carefully, sacrificially. On screen, Tund lifted the notes like they were contaminated. "This is what you came with?" he said, louder now, loud enough for the room to hear, loud enough for humiliation to become public property. "This small thing?" A murmur rippled through the guests. Someone laughed, short, sharp, then abruptly silenced, as if even they heard the cruelty in it. Mama Ifeoma's mouth moved, but no words came at first. Then softly, "It is what I could. You could have stayed away." Tund cut in. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was final. The sound of a door closing. Adaura entered the frame, her hand reaching for his arm. "Stop," she whispered, fear tightening her voice. He shook her off. Not violently, worse, dismissively. Then Mama Ifeoma said something that twisted Tund's stomach now as he watched. She didn't curse him. She didn't call him wicked. She didn't raise her voice. She asked a question soft, fragile, devastating. "Is this how you thank me?" The camera captured the flicker in Tund's eyes, the brief hesitation. A pause where he could have stopped, where he could have swallowed pride, where he could have remembered the woman who carried him. But his eyes darted around the room. checking faces, checking witnesses, checking reputation, and pride won. His hand lifted, the slap came. In the raw footage, it was louder than he remembered, not because it struck harder, because the silence around it was absolute. Adawara gasped. A glass shattered. The DJ cut off mid-word. The music died like a candle blown out. Mama Ifeama's head snapped sideways, her gel shifted. Her cheek flushed red, and still no one moved, no one stepped forward. Not a single person placed themselves between his son and his mother. Tun's breathing grew uneven as he watched his mother's tears finally fall. On screen, she didn't cry theatrically. She cried like someone whose heart had been asked to carry one last unbearable weight. She touched her cheek. She looked at him. And she whispered one word. Why? Not shouted, whispered. The kind of why that follows you into every room afterward. In the hotel suite, Tun's knuckles turned white around the remote. He paused the video. His chest rose sharply once. Adawara was in the bathroom, washing off makeup that no longer felt like celebration. Water ran steadily, calm, methodical, like she was trying to rinse the night away. On the laptop screen, his own face remained frozen mid-motion, eyes hard. Mouth tense, hand raised. It didn't look like power. It looked like fear, and the worst part wasn't that the footage existed. It was that it was clean, undeniable. He snapped the laptop shut, as if closing it could erase what it had revealed. But in the age of phones and family group chats, nothing stays closed for long. Down in the hotel lobby, Emeka packed his equipment with professional calm. He had filmed weddings for politicians, pastors, celebrities. He had seen public smiles and private sins. Cameras are quiet, but they are never kind. He hadn't intended to destroy anyone. He hadn't intended to conceal the truth either. He sent the raw footage because that was the job. What he didn't expect was what came next. Upstairs, Adawara's phone buzzed. A message from her cousin, then another. Then a call she declined. She stepped out of the bathroom, face bare, eyes rimmed red, and saw Tun sitting at the edge of the bed like a man awaiting sentencing. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down. Okafor Family Group 17 new messages. Her stomach dropped. She opened it. At first, only text. Questions, shock, anger wrapped in polite restraint. "Is this true? Please tell me this is not what I'm seeing, Adawara. Chief, are you aware?" Then the clip appeared. Not the full raw file. A cut. 30 seconds. Just enough. Long enough to show Mama Ifeama stepping forward, hopeful. Long enough to show Tun's face clearly. Long enough to capture the sentence. "You embarrassed me my whole life." And then, the slap. Adawara's breath vanished. Her hand flew to her mouth to hold back a sound that might wake the entire hotel. "Tund," she whispered. He looked at her phone. His face shifted. Not to regret, to panic. "How did they?" he started. Her phone buzzed again. Not Okafor family this time. Adeyemi family. Then church sisters. Then aunties in Lagos. Then village cousins. Then a voice note from an aunt whose tone could turn honey into ash. "Tund, if you are not mad, you will explain yourself. The whole family is seeing this. The whole family." The clip spread like wildfire inside the family first. Passed from auntie to auntie, cousin to cousin. Not public yet, not online yet. But within bloodlines and group chats, it moved faster than any rumor from the night before. Because now it wasn't "they said," it was "he said." His face, his voice, his hand. Within minutes, the wedding stopped being a celebration. It became something else. A private scandal that could no longer stay private. A story the family couldn't unsee. A clip that, before strangers ever watched it, had already gone viral where it hurt most. At home. 1 week before the wedding, Mama Ifeoma had already made her decision. She did not make it in anger. She did not make it in tears. She made it on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, in a small office that smelled faintly of paper, dust, and old ceiling fans. The lawyer's name was Barrister Ugochukwu Nadi, a black Nigerian man in his late 50s, precise in his speech and careful with his pen. He had known Mama Ifeoma for years. He had once helped her settle a land dispute after her husband died. He remembered her as the woman who always came alone. Alone, but never bowed. That afternoon, she sat upright in the wooden chair across from him, her wrapper neatly arranged, her back straight, like someone who had mastered the art of carrying weight without bending. "You're sure?" he asked gently. She nodded once. "I'm sure." Her voice did not tremble. On the desk between them lay documents, property deeds, bank summaries, proof of ownership for a modest but quietly valuable inheritance most people had underestimated for years. Because Mama Ifeoma had never looked wealthy. She had looked like a woman who worked, but the small shop she built over decades had grown. The land she refused to sell, even when others mocked her, had multiplied in value. The quiet investments she made through cooperative societies had matured. She did not live loudly, she lived wisely. "I want it transferred to the foundation," she said. "The Children of Tomorrow initiative?" Barrister Hugo asked. "Yes, the foundation built schools in rural communities, fed children whose names would never appear in newspapers, paid tuition for girls whose dreams were often traded for early marriages." "And your son?" the lawyer asked carefully. Mama Ifeoma paused, not because she was uncertain, because she was remembering. The boy who once clung to her wrapper when strangers came too close. The boy who cried the first time he wore shoes without holes. The boy who once said, 8 years old, "Mama, I'll build you a big house." She closed her eyes briefly. "My son," she said quietly, "is building his own house." The lawyer studied her face. There was no bitterness, no rage, only something final. "Then we should update the will," he said softly. "Yes." She reached into her bag and removed a folded sheet of paper, written and rewritten, lines crossed out, words chosen with care. She slid it across the desk. Barrister Hugo read it once, then again. When he finished, he looked up slowly. "This is strong," he said. Mama Ifeoma held his gaze. "So am I," she replied. They signed that day. The assets were transferred within 48 hours. The will was updated and sealed. 1 week later, she attended her son's wedding, and he raised his hand. The honeymoon was designed to erase discomfort. Tund and Adaura traveled to Zanzibar, where the ocean shimmered like polished glass and the sand felt like powdered sugar beneath their feet. The villa overlooked water so clear it seemed unreal, a place built for photographs and forgiveness. But some things follow you across borders. The clip had spread through both families. It had been discussed in living rooms and over dinner tables. Uncles shook their heads. Aunties called with sharp words disguised as concern. Adaura's father had grown quiet. Tun had grown defensive. "We're married now," Tun said one evening, standing on the balcony as the sun bled orange into the horizon. "People will talk and move on." Adaura leaned against the railing, her white sundress shifting in the breeze. "Will you?" she asked. He didn't answer. Because the truth was heavier than the ocean air. He had called his mother twice before they left. She didn't answer. He told himself she needed time. He told himself she was dramatic. He told himself many things. But he did not apologize. Back in Lagos, Barrister Ugochukwu prepared a formal letter. He was building a future that required capital he had always assumed would be there. Not because he was greedy, because he believed it was his mother's land, his mother's accounts, his mother's quiet fortune. He had grown up hearing, "All this will be yours one day." He had translated it into inevitability. 3 days after their return, a black car pulled into the driveway. The driver stepped out first. Then Barrister Ugochukwu Nadi, Tund frowned as he saw him through the window. "What is he doing here?" he muttered. Adara looked up from the dining table. "Who?" "The lawyer. There is something about a lawyer at your door that changes the temperature of a room." Barrister Hugo entered with measured steps. He greeted Adara politely. He nodded at Tund with the restraint of a man who had already rehearsed the damage he must deliver. "I apologize for arriving unannounced," he said. "But this requires your immediate attention." "What is this about?" Tund asked. The lawyer remained standing a moment longer than comfortable. "It concerns your mother." Silence tightened. "Is she ill?" Tund asked. "No." "Then what?" Barrister Hugo sat down and placed a leather folder on the glass table. "1 week before your wedding," he began, "your mother transferred her assets to the Children of Tomorrow initiative." Tund blinked. "Transferred," he repeated. "Yes." "The land in Enugu?" "Yes." "The commercial property?" "Yes." "The accounts?" "Yes." Each answer landed heavier than the last. Tund let out a short laugh. "That's not possible." The lawyer did not smile. "It is complete. Legally binding. Executed before the wedding." Adara's hand slowly rose to her mouth. "Why would she?" Tund began. "There is more," the lawyer said gently. He removed a sealed envelope. "This is her updated will." "Updated?" Tund's voice tightened. 1 week before the wedding. The timing mattered. "Read it," Tund said. The lawyer broke the seal and unfolded the document. He read the formal language first: revocation of prior wills, confirmation of charitable transfers, appointment of executors. Then he reached the final clause. He paused. "Just read it," Tund snapped. The lawyer glanced briefly at Adara. Then he read the line exactly as written. "I leave my son exactly what he left me that night. Nothing." The words did not echo. They didn't have to. They settled into the room like a verdict. Something collapsed in Tund's chest. Not anger. Not grief. Recognition. Recognition that the slap had not only broken skin, it had broken inheritance. "She can't do this," he said hoarsely. "She already did." "I know it was because of the wedding." "No," the lawyer said evenly. "It was before the wedding." That distinction mattered. This was not revenge. It was foresight. It was a mother who had seen something her son had not. Tund stopped pacing. He felt small inside his own house. The marble seemed colder, the silence heavier. He remembered the sentence, the look on her face. He had believed humiliation would fade. He had believed money would remain. He had believed blood was permanent. He had been wrong. Adara whispered through tears. She prepared for this, and that was the deepest cut. Mama Ifioma had prepared, not for his apology, not for his growth, but for his absence. Barrister Hugo adjusted his jacket. "I'm sorry," he said, "not for the legal process, but for the fracture he had just delivered." He left. Tund stood in the center of the room, surrounded by luxury, by success, by silence. And for the first time since the wedding, the slap no longer felt like power. It felt like loss. Because what his mother had given away was not just land, not just money. She had given away the future he believed was guaranteed. And in its place, she left him exactly what he left her that night. Nothing. His friends started drifting away first. Not dramatically, not with confrontation, just distance. Chike stopped dropping by unannounced. The jokes in the group chat got shorter. The late-night laughter that used to fill Tund's living room faded into polite excuses. "Busy week, bro. Traveling. Let's catch up soon." Soon never came. At first, Tund told himself it was temporary. People got uncomfortable around scandal. Time would smooth it out. But time didn't soften anything. Time clarified. The men who once admired his boldness started speaking differently when he wasn't around. One night, at a lounge in Victoria Island, Chike leaned across the table and lowered his voice. "It's not just the slap," he said. "It's what he said before. That sentence had weight now. You embarrassed me my whole life. It wouldn't die." It had escaped family group chats, escaped private whispers, escaped the fantasy that it would stay contained. The raw clip, clear, steady, undeniable, had leaked. No one ever admitted who shared it publicly first. Maybe a cousin trying to prove a point. Maybe a friend who couldn't keep protecting cruelty. Maybe an assistant on the video team. In Lagos, information moved like harmattan wind. Quiet, fast, unstoppable. Within days, the clip was everywhere. Edited, captioned, debated. Some called Tund ungrateful. Some called him a symbol of modern arrogance. A few defended him, weakly. But most did something worse than criticize. They watched, they replayed, they judged. The comments multiplied. How can a man speak to his mother like that? This is what pride does. Look at her face. That's pain. Every replay added another echo to that one sentence. And every echo followed Tund into every room he entered. At the office, conversations stopped when he walked in. Business partners who once loved being seen beside his ambition now measured their words. Investors avoided eye contact. A deal that had seemed guaranteed quietly fell apart. Reputation was currency. And his had cracked. The company he believed would someday be fully his, the family-owned construction firm founded by his late father and quietly stabilized by his mother's financial wisdom, shifted beneath his feet. The ownership papers had never been fully transferred. They had always been in Mama Ifeoma's name. And now, they belonged to the foundation. The Children of Tomorrow initiative became the majority stakeholder. A board was appointed. A new managing director installed. Tund's title changed overnight, from heir apparent to employee. He signed documents he once expected to control. He sat in meetings where younger executives spoke with authority over decisions he assumed would be his. And every time he reached for power, he felt the invisible absence of something he'd thought permanent. Inheritance. At home, the distance between him and Adara widened in silence. She stopped bringing up his mother. Stopped asking if he'd called. She simply watched. She watched him scroll through comments late at night, jaw clenched, eyes restless. Watched him rehearse explanations he never delivered. Watched him snap at the smallest questions. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, she finally spoke. "Did you mean it?" He looked up from his phone. "Mean what?" "That she embarrassed you. Your whole life." The room suddenly felt smaller. He opened his mouth out of instinct, to defend himself, to add context, to blame stress, pressure, class expectations. But the truth didn't rearrange itself into comfort. "I was angry," he said. "That's not what I asked." Her voice didn't rise. That made it worse. He looked away. Silence answered for him. Adara's eyes filled slowly, not with dramatic tears, but with something quieter, the realization that marriage doesn't change a man's character. It just reveals it at closer range. "I married a man," she said softly, "who believes his mother was his shame." He flinched. "That's not, it is." She stood up and walked toward the bedroom. "I can live with scandal," she said without turning around. "I don't know if I can live with cruelty." The door closed behind her. No slam, no scene, just distance. Tund sat in the dim light, his phone glowing in his hand. He opened his call history. Her name was still there. Mama. He pressed it. It rang, and rang, and rang, then nothing. No voicemail, no text, no reply. Weeks passed. The house felt bigger, colder. Adara traveled more often to her parents, home under the quiet excuse of visiting. When she returned, she moved with a politeness that felt like glass. One afternoon, Tund drove to his mother's old house, his heart pounding with something he refused to name. The gate was locked. A neighbor stepped outside when he knocked too long. "She left," the woman said gently. "Left where?" "Somewhere peaceful." The answer wasn't meant to hurt. But it did. "She sold the house?" "No," the neighbor said. "She donated it." The foundation had turned it into a learning center. Children's voices now filled the courtyard where Tund once played. He stood outside the gate, listening to laughter that no longer belonged to him. Inside, a mural had been painted on the wall, a woman holding a child's hand beneath a tree. No plaque with his name, no sign of legacy, just children reading, and his mother's absence. He called again. Nothing. He sent a message, no response. He wrote a letter. It came back unopened. She hadn't retaliated, hadn't cursed him publicly, hadn't taken him to court. She'd done something far more devastating. She'd withdrawn her assets, withdrawn her protection, withdrawn her presence, withdrawn herself. Tund realized, slowly and painfully, that there is a punishment harsher than revenge. It is erasure. To exist in a world where the person who once fought for you refuses to fight at all. Months later, the video still circulated. It never fully vanished. Every few weeks, someone rediscovered it, reposted it, commented again. The internet doesn't forget, and neither does silence. Tund stopped showing up to big events, avoided cameras, declined interviews, turned down invitations that once thrilled him. His name didn't open doors the same way anymore. One night, Adara moved into the guest room without discussion. No announcement. She just placed her pillow there. He didn't argue. There are moments when pride screams louder than remorse. And then there are moments when remorse finally whispers louder than pride. Tund stood alone one night in the living room, city lights flickering beyond the window. He remembered the wedding hall, the chandeliers, the envelope, his mother's eyes. He remembered the sentence more clearly now than he had that day. "You embarrassed me my whole life," and he finally understood what it really meant. He wasn't ashamed of her. He was ashamed of where he came from. Ashamed of struggle. Ashamed of simplicity. Ashamed of love that didn't look expensive. And in trying to erase that shame publicly, he erased something far greater privately. He picked up his phone one last time, scrolled to her name, stared at it. Didn't press call, because he understood something now. Some silences are chosen. Some are deserved. He walked out to the balcony and looked over the city that once felt like proof of his success. He had money. He had status. He had a name people recognized. But the one voice that used to say his name with unconditional love no longer spoke it. And that absence echoed louder than any scandal ever could. The slap lasted 1 second. The silence lasted forever.